Nobody was ever supposed to open that closet. It looked like any ordinary closet in a quiet home, filled with jackets, boxes, and old shoes that nobody wore anymore. But behind those everyday things was another door, and behind that door were years of carefully hidden dreams. Dresses chosen with incredible care. Shoes polished until they looked brand new. Makeup neatly arranged in small organizers. Scarves folded with precision. Every item represented a piece of a life I had convinced myself could never exist outside those four walls. If anyone had discovered it, I believed everything would have fallen apart. What I never expected was that opening that closet would become the very thing that finally set me free. For nearly 10 years, that hidden space belonged only to me. Every time life became overwhelming, every time I felt trapped by expectations, I would quietly unlock the closet, step inside, and simply breathe. It wasn't the clothes that brought me peace. It was the feeling that, for a little while, I didn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't. The strange thing about secrets is that they grow heavier with time. At first, hiding felt easy. Then it became exhausting. Every conversation required careful words. Every unexpected visitor made my heart race. Every time someone walked near that closet, I imagined the worst. I often asked myself the same question. How long can someone hide from themselves before they forget who they really are? The answer never came. Instead, the closet slowly became more than just a place to keep clothes. It became a collection of memories. The first dress I had ever bought. The first pair of heels I had nervously walked across the bedroom floor in. The first lipstick that took me 20 minutes to apply because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The first evening I looked in the mirror and smiled instead of criticizing myself. Every object carried a story. Every story carried a lesson. Outside that closet, I lived a completely ordinary life. I worked hard, met friends for coffee, attended family gatherings, and smiled in photographs. Everyone believed they knew me completely. Sometimes I wondered if they really did, or if they only knew the version of me I believed they wanted to see. One rainy Saturday afternoon, while cleaning the house, I heard my sister call from upstairs. "Can I borrow one of your storage boxes?" My heart stopped. The closet. She was standing only a few steps away from it. "I'll get it," I answered far too quickly. She looked surprised by how fast I hurried upstairs. "You okay?" "Yeah, just trying to remember where I put everything." She smiled and walked away, never realizing how close she had come to discovering the biggest secret of my life. That evening I sat on the bedroom floor staring at the closet door. For the first time, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't afraid because of what was inside. I was afraid because I had spent years believing that anyone who saw the real me would immediately stop loving me. That thought hurt more than I wanted to admit. Over the following weeks, I began writing in a notebook. Every night, I wrote one honest sentence. Things I had never said aloud. Things I barely admitted to myself. The notebook slowly filled with questions. Why do I feel happiest when I stop pretending? Why does self-expression feel like freedom instead of fear? What am I protecting by hiding all of this? One evening, I read every page from the beginning. A pattern appeared immediately. None of the entries were about clothing. None were about makeup. Every single page was about honesty. That realization changed everything. Maybe the closet wasn't filled with pretty secrets after all. Maybe it was filled with years of postponed honesty. The next morning, instead of opening the closet, I opened the bedroom window. Fresh air filled the room. Sunlight reached places it hadn't touched before. For some reason, that simple moment felt symbolic. Maybe my life had been waiting for the same thing. Not another lock. Not another hiding place. Just a little more light. And standing there, with the closet behind me and the morning ahead of me, I quietly made a promise. One day, those pretty secrets would no longer have to live behind a closed door. They would simply become part of my story. That promise stayed in my mind for weeks. Every morning before leaving for work, I glanced at the closet door. Every evening when I came home, I did the same. It was no longer just a place where I kept clothes. It had become a reminder of a question I could no longer ignore. How much of my life was I willing to spend hiding? One quiet Sunday afternoon, with the house completely silent, I unlocked the closet and stepped inside. The familiar scent of fabric and perfume greeted me like an old friend. Everything was exactly where I had left it. Dresses hung neatly in order, shoes were lined up carefully beneath them, and the small makeup organizer rested on the shelf beside a framed mirror. I smiled without even realizing it. For years, this room had been my escape. But suddenly, I didn't want it to be an escape anymore. I wanted it to become part of my real life. I carefully chose a simple outfit, sat in front of the mirror, and began practicing again. My hands weren't as nervous as they had been years earlier. Every movement felt calmer. Every step reminded me how much I had learned through patience. When I finished, I looked into the mirror. The reflection looking back at me wasn't pretending. It wasn't trying to become someone else. It was simply someone who looked comfortable. That single word stayed with me. Comfortable. For years, I had believed confidence meant looking perfect. Now I understood that confidence begins the moment you stop fighting yourself. As I sat there thinking, I heard my phone vibrate. It was a message from an old college friend. Haven't seen you in ages. Coffee tomorrow? I smiled and replied yes. The next afternoon we met at a small cafe downtown. We talked about work, family, and everything that had changed over the years. Then he looked at me for a moment and asked something unexpected. You seem different. I laughed. Different how? Happier. That answer caught me by surprise. I don't know if happier is the right word. I think it is, he said. Back in college, you always looked like you were carrying something heavy. Today you seem relaxed. For a second, I considered changing the subject. Instead, I asked him a question. Do you think people spend too much time pretending? He smiled. Almost everyone does. That conversation stayed with me long after we left the cafe. It reminded me that people often notice our peace before they notice any outward change. Confidence has a quiet way of showing itself. Over the following months, I stopped treating the closet like a place of secrecy. I reorganized it, not because I wanted to hide it better, but because I wanted it to reflect who I was becoming. I added a small bookshelf filled with fashion magazines, sketchbooks, and journals. I hung a simple piece of artwork on the wall. The space no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like a creative studio. Every evening I spent a little time there, sketching outfit ideas or writing down thoughts about confidence and self-expression. Slowly, I realized that creativity had always been connected to this journey. It wasn't about changing my identity. It was about finally allowing my imagination to breathe. One evening, while looking through my old journals, I found an entry I had written years before. Maybe one day I won't be afraid anymore. I stared at those words for a long time. Without thinking, I picked up a pen and wrote underneath them. That day finally arrived. I closed the journal with a smile. The closet still held dresses, shoes, and makeup. But those were no longer its greatest treasures. Its greatest treasure was the confidence I had built inside those walls. Because every time I opened that door, I wasn't escaping from the world anymore. I was stepping closer to the most honest version of myself. And little by little, I realized the title of my story had changed. It was no longer a closet full of pretty secrets. It was becoming a life filled with confidence, creativity, and the courage to never hide those beautiful parts of myself again. The more I embraced that courage, the less I felt the need to keep counting the days or measuring my progress. At some point, the journey stopped being about transformation and simply became my everyday life. That surprised me more than anything else. For years, I believed confidence was a destination. I imagined there would be one perfect day when every fear disappeared forever. Instead, confidence arrived quietly through ordinary moments. It arrived the morning I opened the closet without feeling nervous. It arrived the afternoon I smiled at my reflection without searching for flaws. It arrived the evening I realized I had spent an entire day simply enjoying life instead of worrying about what someone else might think. Those moments were small. Together, they changed everything. One rainy afternoon, I decided to clean every shelf inside the closet. As I sorted through boxes, I found receipts, old notes, and little reminders from the beginning of my journey. There was the receipt for my very first lipstick. A handwritten shopping list that simply read, "Just be brave." a tiny sticky note tucked inside a shoebox that said, "One step at a time." I couldn't remember writing that note. But apparently, the version of me who was frightened years ago had already known the answer. One step at a time. That had been enough. I carefully placed every memory into a small keepsake box instead of throwing them away. Not because I wanted to live in the past, because I wanted to remember how far I had come. The next weekend, I visited a bookstore and wandered into the art and fashion section. I spent nearly an hour looking through books about color, design, and illustration. Years earlier, I would have worried that someone might question why I was there. Now I simply enjoyed learning. I realized that growth becomes much easier when curiosity is stronger than fear. Back at home, I filled page after page in my sketchbook. My designs became more creative, my ideas more confident, and my imagination more free. I wasn't trying to become famous or impress anyone. I was creating because it brought me peace. One evening, while looking through my latest sketches, I noticed something interesting. Every design was brighter than the ones I had drawn years before. The colors were more vibrant. The lines were more confident. Without realizing it, my artwork had changed as my mindset changed. My wife looked over my shoulder and smiled. "Your drawings look happier." I laughed. "I think they finally matched the person drawing them." She nodded. I was thinking exactly that. That simple sentence meant more than she probably realized. For so long, I had separated different parts of myself. The creative side, the confident side, the curious side, the compassionate side. Now they no longer felt separated. They felt like one complete person. That was the real transformation. Not changing into someone else. Becoming whole. Months later, while organizing the closet again, I paused in front of the mirror. The room looked different now. Not because of the clothes. Because of the feeling inside it. Years ago, this room had been built from fear. Now it was built from honesty. The closet had become a symbol of my journey. At first it protected my secrets. Later it protected my dreams. Finally, it no longer needed to protect anything. Because the greatest secret had disappeared. I was no longer hiding from myself. I gently closed the closet door and smiled. Not because I wanted to hide what was inside, but because I finally understood something important. The real treasure had never been the dresses, the shoes, or the makeup. The real treasure was the confidence I discovered while learning to accept myself. Looking back now, I don't remember every outfit. I don't remember every lipstick shade. I don't remember every small detail. What I remember is the feeling. The feeling of taking that very first step despite being afraid. The feeling of realizing I deserved kindness for myself. The feeling of discovering that authenticity brings a kind of peace that pretending never can. And whenever someone asks me what was hidden inside that old closet for all those years, I smile quietly. Because the answer isn't dresses. It isn't makeup. It isn't pretty secrets. The answer is courage. A courage that waited patiently behind one closed door until I was finally ready to open it. And once that door opened, I realized it had never been leading into a closet at all. It had been leading me home to myself. A few weeks later, something happened that I never could have planned. I came home from work earlier than usual. The house was quiet, and I assumed no one was there. As I walked upstairs, I noticed the closet door was slightly open. My heart immediately started racing. I was certain I had closed it before leaving that morning. For a moment, I couldn't move. Every fear I thought I had left behind suddenly came rushing back. Had someone found it? Had a family member stopped by? Had a friend been here? My mind imagined every possible explanation except the truth. Slowly, I walked toward the room. The closer I got, the louder my heartbeat became. I gently pushed the door open. Inside, everything looked exactly where I had left it. Nothing had been moved. Nothing was missing. I let out a long breath and laughed quietly at myself. Then I noticed something resting on the small chair beside the mirror. A folded piece of paper. It definitely hadn't been there that morning. With trembling hands, I picked it up. There was no name written on it. Only a short message. You don't have to hide your creativity. It's one of the things that makes you special. I read it again. And again. There was only one person Who could have written those words? My wife. That evening, when she came home, I held up the note. You left this. She smiled. I wondered how long it would take you to find it. You scared me. I know. She laughed softly. I'm sorry. I looked down at the note again. Why did you write it?
She sat beside me.
Because every time you step into that room, you still act like you're asking permission to be yourself. Her words caught me completely off guard. I guess I do. You don't need permission anymore. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she stood up. Come with me. She led me back upstairs. Instead of stopping at the closet, she opened the spare bedroom across the hallway. It was almost empty. Only a desk and a bookshelf stood against the wall. I've been thinking, she said. What if this room became your studio? My studio? She nodded. For your sketches, your ideas, your creativity. I looked around the room. You mean not the closet anymore? She smiled. The closet helped you when you needed privacy. She gently placed her hand on my shoulder. But you've outgrown it. That sentence stayed with me. You've outgrown it. For years, that closet had been my safe place. But maybe she was right. Maybe confidence means knowing when it's time to leave your hiding place behind. Over the next few weekends, we transformed the spare room together. We painted the walls a soft neutral color, built shelves for sketchbooks and design books, added better lighting beside a large drawing desk, hung a full-length mirror near the corner, placed a small plant beside the window. Every little detail made the room feel welcoming. When everything was finished, I stood quietly in the middle of the room. It didn't feel like a secret anymore. It felt like possibility. The closet wasn't empty. Many of the clothes and keepsakes were still there. But something important had changed. They were no longer hidden away because of fear. They were simply part of my journey. The studio represented my future. The closet represented my past. Both rooms mattered. One reminded me where I had been. The other reminded me where I was going. That evening I opened a brand new sketchbook. Across the very first page, I wrote one sentence. The best version of me began the day I stopped hiding. Then I started drawing. Not because I wanted approval. Not because I wanted perfection. But because creating finally felt as natural as breathing. As the weeks passed, the studio filled with more sketches than I could count. Fashion ideas, color palettes, accessory concepts, journal entries, inspirational quotes. It became more than a room. It became proof that dreams grow the moment they are given space to breathe. One afternoon, my wife walked in carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She looked around the room and smiled. Remember when all of this fit inside one little closet? I laughed. I remember thinking that closet was my whole world. And now, I looked around at the walls covered with artwork, the shelves full of sketchbooks, and the sunlight pouring through the window. Now I know it was only the beginning. She smiled proudly. I was hoping you'd say that. At that moment, I realized something that had taken years to understand. The closet had never been my prison. Fear was. And the key that unlocked it wasn't hanging on a door. It was the courage to believe that the person I had been hiding deserved the same kindness, respect, and acceptance that I so easily gave to everyone else. That was the day my pretty secrets stopped being secrets and quietly became the most honest chapter of my life. The months that followed brought something I never expected. Once I stopped treating my creativity like a secret, opportunities began appearing in places I had never noticed before. One evening, while scrolling through social media after dinner, I came across an announcement for a local fashion illustration workshop. It wasn't a competition. It wasn't a professional course. It was simply a weekend class where people of all ages could learn, sketch, and share ideas. For several minutes, I stared at the screen. My first thought was, I don't belong there. Then I smiled. Years ago, I had said the exact same thing about opening the closet. Without giving myself time to overthink, I clicked register. The workshop was held the following Saturday in a bright studio filled with large windows and drawing tables. I almost turned around before walking inside. Everyone else seemed confident, chatting with one another while arranging pencils, sketchbooks, and fabric samples. I quietly found a seat near the back of the room. The instructor welcomed everyone with a smile. "Today isn't about creating perfect designs," she said. "Today is about telling stories through fashion." Those words immediately caught my attention. Stories. That was exactly what my sketches had always been. Not just clothes. Stories. As the class began, we were asked to design an outfit inspired by a personal memory. Everyone immediately started drawing. I sat there staring at the blank page. Then I remembered the closet. The first dress. The first lipstick. The first moment I smiled at my own reflection. My pencil finally began moving. Without realizing it, I spent nearly 2 hours completely focused on my drawing. When the instructor walked by my table, she stopped. "This design feels very personal." I nodded. "It is. You've put a lot of emotion into these details." No one had ever described my sketches that way before. Emotion. She wasn't complimenting the dress itself. She was noticing the story behind it. At the end of the workshop, everyone's artwork was displayed around the room. I hesitated before pinning mine to the wall. Compared to the others, it seemed simple.
But it was honest.
People slowly walked around looking at each drawing. A few paused in front of mine. One woman smiled. "I love how peaceful this feels." Another participant added, "It looks like someone finally found confidence." Neither of them knew anything about me, yet somehow they understood exactly what I had been trying to express. For the first time, I realized that honesty has a way of reaching people without needing an explanation. When I returned home that evening, my wife immediately noticed the smile on my face. "How was it?" I handed her the certificate the workshop had given everyone. "I think I found something I've been looking for." She looked at the sketch I had brought home. "I don't think you found it today." "What do you mean?" She gently touched the drawing. "I think you've been finding it one step at a time ever since you opened that closet." I smiled. She was right. The workshop wasn't the beginning. It was proof of how far I had already come. Over the following months, I continued attending classes whenever I could. Every new lesson taught me something different. Some improved my drawing skills. Others taught me about color, texture, or design. But the greatest lesson had nothing to do with fashion. It was that creativity grows where fear once lived. The room that had once been my secret studio became filled with finished sketches hanging neatly on the walls. Looking at them together felt like reading chapters of a book. The earliest drawings were careful and uncertain. The newest ones were bold and full of life. One evening, I placed the very first sketch beside the latest one. The difference made me emotional. Not because one drawing was better than the other, because together they showed a journey from hiding to creating to believing. As I stood there quietly, my wife walked into the room. She looked at both sketches and smiled. "Keep them together."
Why?
"So, you'll never forget where you started." I nodded. She was right. The beginning mattered just as much as the destination. Because without that small closet full of pretty secrets, I might never have discovered a life filled with confidence, creativity, and the courage to finally let my true self be seen. A year later, something happened that I never imagined would matter so much. The Community Art Center announced a small exhibition where local artists could display creative projects. There were no prizes, no judges, and no expectations. It was simply a celebration of creativity. When I first read the announcement, I almost closed the page. Then I remembered how many opportunities one had missed simply because fear convinced me I wasn't ready. This time I refused to let fear decide. I submitted 3 fashion illustrations along with a short paragraph explaining that every design represented a step toward confidence and self-expression. A week later, I received an email. All 3 pieces had been accepted. I stared at the screen for several minutes before calling my wife. They accepted them. I knew they would. "You didn't even see the email." "I didn't need to." She laughed. "I've believed in you long before you believed in yourself." Those words stayed with me all day. The evening before the exhibition, I barely slept. Not because I thought my drawings had to be perfect, because they felt personal. Every line represented a memory. Every color represented an emotion. Every sketch represented another wall I had finally broken down. The next afternoon, We arrived at the gallery together. People slowly walked through the room, stopping to admire paintings, sculptures, photographs, and handmade artwork. Eventually, we reached the wall where my illustrations were displayed. Seeing them hanging there felt unreal. Only a few years earlier, those same ideas had been hidden inside a closet where I believed no one would ever see them. Now, complete strangers were studying them with curiosity. One older gentleman stood quietly in front of the first illustration for nearly a minute. Then, he turned toward me. "Did you draw these?" "Yes." He smiled warmly. "They remind me that creativity becomes beautiful the moment it's honest." I thanked him. He walked away without asking another question. He didn't need my life story. The artwork had already told it. Throughout the afternoon, several visitors shared similar thoughts. Some admired the colors. Some noticed the attention to detail. Others simply smiled and moved on. What surprised me most was that nobody reacted with the fear I had imagined for so many years. Most people simply appreciated the work for what it was. That realization quietly erased one of the last fears I had been carrying. Sometimes the worst judgments exist only inside our own imagination. When the exhibition ended, the organizer handed every participant a small certificate of appreciation. It wasn't a trophy. It wasn't a major achievement. Yet holding that simple piece of paper meant more to me than I expected. It represented something much greater than an art show. It represented freedom. That evening, after we returned home, I placed the certificate beside the old sketchbook that had started everything years before. The two items looked perfect together. One represented the beginning. The other represented the journey. As I looked around the studio, I noticed how different it had become. The shelves were full. The walls displayed finished artwork. The desk held fresh sketches waiting to become new ideas. The room no longer felt like a place where secrets lived. It felt like a place where dreams continued growing. My wife walked in carrying 2 cups of tea. She looked around the room and smiled. "Do you miss the old closet?" I thought about the question for a moment. I miss the memories, but not the fear. I shook my head. Not the fear. She nodded. "I was hoping you'd say that." We sat quietly for several minutes, watching the evening sunlight shine through the window. Finally, I spoke. "You know what's strange?" "What?" "I used to think the closet protected me. And now, I realize it was preparing me." She smiled. "For what?" "For this." I looked around the room. For the first time, I understood that every hidden dream, every sketch, every quiet evening spent wondering who I really was had led to this peaceful moment. Nothing had been wasted. Not the fear. Not the uncertainty. Not even the years I spent hiding. Every chapter had taught me something. Every experience had shaped the person I had become. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the window, I quietly opened the old closet one final time. The shelves were almost empty now. Only a few keepsakes remained inside. The first lipstick. The very first sketch. A handwritten note that simply read, "Just be brave." I smiled, folded the note carefully, placed it inside my newest sketchbook, then gently closed the closet door. Not because I wanted to lock away another secret, but because there were no secrets left to hide. Everything that had once lived behind that door had become part of my life. And as I turned off the light and walked toward the studio where new sketches waited on the desk, I realized the title of my story no longer belonged to the past. The closet had once been full of pretty secrets. Now my life was full of beautiful truths. And that, more than anything else, was the greatest transformation I could have ever